Warm greetings from Spain. It's my pleasure to focus with you on some of the highlights of the conference, which I had the privilege of giving last November in Sydney, thanks to the Education Office of the Spanish Embassy, and in which I focused on what's hot and what's not on the Clil agenda by sharing the main lessons we've learned and signposting ways forward in bilingual education. And the approach to bilingual education on which I will be centering is Clil, which, as you know, stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. It involves teaching certain subjects in the target language in order to maximize exposure to it in a meaningful way. And it's largely considered to be the European approach to bilingual education, although now it's being increasingly embraced in Latin America, Asia, or Australia, to mention but a few places. It's been largely heralded as the most important innovation in language teaching in the past 25 years. And the consensus is that now it's largely an unstoppable train. It's left the station, there's no going back. So it is incumbent upon us to do whatever it takes to ensure that that metaphorical train does not derail and we allow its passengers to reach their destination safely. And we've been on that metaphorical train journey for a good 2 decades now in our context. And that train was chugging along nicely until we hit a snag a couple of years ago with the full-fledged crisis that we lived due to COVID. And indeed, these past 2 years have really been something else for us. For example, here in Spain, we've had to wade through natural phenomena like a blizzard in Madrid, earthquakes in Granada, volcano eruptions in the Canary Islands. Now we have the heart-wrenching situation of the war on the Ukraine. We've, of course, had to cope with the biggie, COVID, with which we're still largely grappling. And pedagogically, we've also endured times of hardship with that emergency shift to online teaching, which was so harshly criticized. And in bilingual education, we've also lived a crisis with hundreds of schools purportedly claiming to drop out of bilingual programs. And this crisis has largely been due to a series of false myths or misconceptions which have been proliferating around Clil and which are based on unsubstantiated opinions or isolated cases fueled by what I call el fenómeno del cuñadismo. In English, this would be something like the phenomenon of brother-in-lawism. Because here in Spain, I don't know if it's an urban legend or a hard and fast fact, our cuñados, our brothers-in-law, they seem to know about everything. It doesn't matter what topic you bring up over Christmas dinner, they know about it, and they've got an opinion which they firmly believe is the right one. And this is exactly what's happening with Clil. Everyone has an opinion on it, even if they haven't implemented it or researched on it or taught it. And these false myths are being fueled by newspaper articles, blog and social media posts, and even on national television. And they're leading to what I call the pendulum effect in Clil research, because we can discern 2 clear-cut moments. The first one I call the Pollyanna moment, because when we started out on Clil research, everything was peachy. Not a single thing was found wrong with Clil in initial articles. Suspicious, right? But in the past half a decade or so, that metaphorical pendulum has violently swerved to the other extreme. And now we're currently positioned in what I call the Scrooge moment, because we tend to harbor a very negative or pessimistic outlook on bilingual education. This is ridiculous, and we need to bring that metaphorical pendulum to a standstill by not being Pollyannas or Scrooges, but by being what Rosling terms possibilists. That is, people who do not harbor an overly positive or negative outlook on a phenomenon, but who are guided by facts. As we've heard in COVID, facts, not fear. Luckily, we now have those facts because we've been on that Clil road for a good 20 years. So we've got a track record. We've got what Perrin terms an efficiency agenda to allow us to determine what has worked and what has not. And this is exactly what I would like to focus on with you today by centering on the hot topics, burning issues, recurrent questions around Clil in order to weed out the non-issues, which are now obsolete concerns that should not figure on the Clil agenda, from the real issues, the genuine challenges which will continue to shape the immediate future of Clil. So in order to address this overarching objective, I would like to focus on 6, in the interest of time, just 6 main non-issues, which should disappear from the Clil agenda, debunking those false myths. And then I will briefly signpost where the action is going to be and how we can address those real issues using practical examples and instruments stemming from our research and innovation projects. And finally, I will extract the broader takeaways from the entire talk. In the interest of time, in order to keep this video relatively short, I will essentially be focusing on the false myths, which we need to debunk with hardcore empirical evidence. So if you're ready, let's hit it. These are our 6 non-issues and real issues. And if we focus on the former to begin with, I think the main false myths or misconceptions plaguing Clil are beautifully summarized in this Facebook post by Pablo Ruiz. Now, I have no idea who Pablo Ruiz is, but I read this post a while back, and he calls for Clil-free schools on the basis of the assumption that bilingual education is detrimental. And he considers this is the case due to these 5 main reasons. He holds that Clil does not improve our target language competence. It generates deficits in our mother tongue. It waters down content learning. It's anti-pedagogical, and it is elitist. Unfortunately, Pablo Ruiz did not get a single one of these right, because all these issues have been examined extensively through external language examinations, via institutionally funded research projects, through reports commissioned by the autonomous communities, thanks to university entrance exam and pearls and TIMSS and PISA results. So we factored in intervening variables. We've examined this inside out, upside down, bottom up, top down, and the research has spoken. And what does it say? Well, first of all, as regards this initial misconception, which we've heard once and again, our schools are not truly bilingual, there have been many quotes. There are experts who consider that the only thing that's bilingual on our schools is the plaque where it says Centro Bilingüe on their door. But these schools are not really bilingual because there's no immersion, right? So they consider that immersion is the only approach that is truly bilingual. In fact, I heard an ad in the radio in Madrid a while back for this school, El Colegio Montfort, which said, es bilingüe de verdad. It's truly bilingual because it's a British immersion school. So the question here is immersion the only approach to bilingual education, or is Clil also bilingual education? Well, if we look at the research through Metz-Klein, we find that there are many approaches to bilingual education. Clil would be positioned right about here. Immersion is the Canadian one. CBI, or dual language programs, the North American one. And Clil is the European one. So it absolutely is bilingual education, simply the European approach to it. This leads to a second issue, which is often discussed as well, and that is whether our students are truly bilingual. That is, do we exit school with perfectly balanced bilinguals in, say, English and Spanish in our case? Again, there are many detractors who consider that they're not at all bilingual because it's impossible for these children to speak both languages in the same way, and they furthermore have an accent. But the thing is, with Clil, we don't seek perfectly balanced bilingual education. What we want is a target language level, which is functional, which will allow our students to simply work and study and get by abroad in a successful way. And this, of course, impinges also on the linguistic command of teachers. We no longer need to be bilingual. We simply need to be fully competent speakers. So as Bruning and Perpman have put it, the term bilingual in Europe does not refer to a perfect native-like mastery of the language, but to a partial functional language competence. In fact, the companion volume to the Sefer no longer talks of native speakers. Rather, the term preferred now is speakers of the target language. So bottom line, accent snobbery is on its way out, and we should feel proud of our accent. It reflects our identity, our culture, our nationality, provided, of course, that we're understandable. So the lesson learned here is that our students, as a result of Clil programs, are not going to be bilingual, nor do we want them to be. This is not a feasible goal. We simply seek for a functional language competence. Another issue which has come to the fore repeatedly is whether Clil truly improves our target language competence. And again, I could bring you a million quotes. A famous writer here in Spain, for example, said that the result is a total disaster. Students do not learn any English as a target language. And Bruton maintains much the same thing. Now, is this true? Well, if we look at the empirical research, we now have quite a robust evidence base, which is tapped into absolutely all the linguistic components and skills, and the results have spoken loud and clear. At the end of primary education, Clil students clearly outstrip non-Clil students in terms of language competence, and this is sustained and enhanced at the end of secondary and baccalaureate. So we can certainly rest assured that linguistic outcomes in Clil programs are not only not a total disaster, they're actually a huge success story. What about our L1? Since we're teaching fewer subjects in our mother tongue, is it detrimentally impacted by Clil? Again, if we look at the research, quite recent research, we find that bilingual and non-bilingual students have been compared in this respect. And at the end of primary, the bilingual students are not only not worse, they're better than their non-bilingual counterparts. And this is again sustained and enhanced for the end of secondary. So again, Clil, we can firmly state on the basis of this evidence, is not detrimental to our mother tongue, in this case, our Spanish competence. There are also legitimate concerns which have been voiced vis-a-vis whether Clil waters down content learning, because many people have said, yeah, okay, you might improve linguistically, but nothing is free. This is done by watering down content subjects. What has the research said? Well, the latest investigations have focused on the impact of Clil on these three content areas that you have on screen. And for the end of primary, results are inconclusive. They're mixed because we have a batch of studies that has found the bilinguals are better. Another set of investigations, which has detected no differences between Clil and non-Clil students, which again would be good news for bilingual programs. And a final set, which has found the non-bilinguals are better. What happens when Clil has been implemented for over 10 years and these students are now at the end of secondary? Well, now absolutely all the research we have points to the superiority of the bilingual learners. So again, this shoots down the belief that Clil waters down content learning, and any misgivings in this respect should be dismissed, especially in the long term. It takes time for Clil to take root and for its full effects to be appraised in this respect. What about the anti-pedagogical criticism leveled at Clil? Well, again, recent research has focused on this issue. And the results point to the fact that first, student-centeredness is firmly embedded in Clil programs. So it's the student who's the protagonist. The teacher has had taken a step back from being a donor of language to become a facilitator. Collaboration amongst teachers has also been stepped up. Materials are more innovative and interesting, and ICTs acquire a particularly sharp relief within them. So we can firmly claim that Clil is not only not anti-pedagogical, it's actually a bid to bring innovation into the Clil classroom. It's acting as a catalyst for change. And finally, let's focus on what I would say is my favorite false myth, and that is that Clil is elitist. And I could bring you a million quotes here. Clil is considered to be an elitist nightmare, to evince a brutal classism, to be an excuse for segregation at schools. Is this true? Well, if we look at the beginning of Clil programs, when bilingual education was just starting out in our context, it is true that there was overt streaming because students who wanted to participate in a Clil program either had to evince a certain subject knowledge or language level or both. And in countries like Spain or Germany, where there were no admission criteria, there was covert streaming through what Lorenzo et al. Termed self-selection, which was bolstered by social class and parental choice. That is, the best learners, the most intelligent, the most motivated, the most linguistically proficient would tend to go into the Clil streams. So yes, at the beginning of Clil programs, elitism was conspicuous. And I think this is something we need to come to terms with because we're observing it in all those countries that are starting to implement Clil. But what happens again over time, now that we have over 20 years of experience in Clil implementation? What's the sitch? What's the situation now? Well, as you can see, recent research from the past 5 years or so has focused on this issue, and three main findings have emerged as clear-cut patterns. First, the self-selection that was initially operative in Clil groups now appears to be increasingly obsolete. That is, the best learners are no longer in the Clil streams, or to put it another way, Clil and non-Clil learners are increasingly homogeneous. Second, and this is a very interesting finding, Clil programs seem to be canceling out differences in core variables associated to elitism, like rural, urban context, socioeconomic status, private, public school. These differences are conspicuous for the non-bilingual strands, but in Clil programs, they're leveling out. And finally, if properly implemented, Clil has the potential to work even in the most disenfranchised settings, in rural public high schools with low socioeconomic status and minority ethnic groups. So lesson learned here, Clil at this point in time, 20 years in, can no longer be considered to be elitist. In fact, it's affording everyone what was previously reserved for the elite. So we need to stop harping on the whole elitism, segregation, classism issue in Clil, and instead make sure that we set in place measures that will allow it to work with over and underachievers alike now that it's being increasingly mainstreamed. And this is precisely one of the real issues which will continue to figure on the Clil agenda, and which I would very briefly like to share with you. Things to bear in mind for the immediate future that need to be tackled for successful Clil implementation involve, first, attuning Clil to our specific context. The one-size-fits-all solution is not going to cut it for bilingual education. And we need to ensure that we carry out specific needs analyses in our context so that we make decisions that address them adequately. And the good news here is that we have the instruments validated, designed, and freely available online to carry out SWOT analyses in our specific contexts. Secondly, as I mentioned previously, we need to cater to diversity. We need to set in place measures and pedagogical guidelines and evaluation procedures and tiered level materials that will truly ensure that Clil works for everyone. We've also seen that research has evinced that Clil takes time to take root. So we need to ensure that we extend bilingual programs from ideally infant education through to university so that the impact of Clil can truly be felt. And we equally need to continue improving, upgrading, fine-tuning current Clil provision and stepping up teacher training measures. We cannot let our guard down in this respect. And the good news is that we've got the instruments and the motivation and the commitments and the experience now to, as the first letter of these 5 challenges spells, to ace it, to kill it, to crush it. So as a conclusion, I would say that the broader takeaways of this talk can be reduced to 3. The first one, as Taylor Swift put it, haters gonna hate, hate, hate. But as she said in that very same song, we need to shake it off. We need to ensure that we overcome brother-in-lawism with stringent research on Clil and not be Pollyannas or Scrooges, but possibilists who are guided by facts. And secondly, those facts need to go from the lab to the public so that absolutely all frontline stakeholders are adequately informed of how Clil is working, and we can all contribute together to overcoming those false myths. And finally, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Clil is very much alive, so it's going to continue throwing curveballs our way, new challenges that we need to address, but we've got experience and instruments and commitment and motivation and a growing body of empirical evidence to ensure that we keep this show on the road. So on that road, that exciting road that we still have ahead towards bilingual education, and coming back full circle to my initial words of crisis, as Winston Churchill put it, never let a good crisis go to waste. And this crisis that we've been living has allowed us to ascertain that on that road to Clil, We don't want unsubstantiated opinions, personal experiences, cuñados to accompany us, but rather we want to ensure that we use empirical evidence like that, which we have provided here in this talk, as our compass for the future to ensure that we keep that metaphorical Clil train on track. Thank you so much for your attention, and I remain at your entire disposal for any queries or comments which you might have in the future. Thank you so much.